and Pow Comic Hour with your hosts, Andrew Lauder.
And Chris Ramos.
Tonight, we are going to cover Monsters by Barry Windsor-Smith.
Barry Windsor-Smith, a giant in the field.
Yes, a legend. He's done works such as Weapon X. He's did some DC work, some Marvel work, and a couple of independent stuff as well. So he's been in the business easy 40 years.
Yeah, and a lot of people might know him from Conan the Barbarian. That was probably one of his bigger runs back in the 80s.
Yeah.
Helped sort of show his style, and then it kind of turned into being a really good storyteller at the same time.
Right.
And that's kind of where Monsters came from.
Sure. And we decided to read Monsters and review the book because it came out this year, and this is his passion project. So he's been working on this story since 1984. So this has been a passion project he's been working on for 35 years.
Yeah. And the really cool thing about this is we were just kind of looking up the availability of Monsters, because when this came out, which was early part of this year, right?
Yeah, April, spring.
Yeah, so early 2021. Finally got published, finally started pumping out books, and the book itself is actually quite well made.
Yes.
Published by Fantagraphics.
Right. And that was kind of the weird thing that we were talking about, is this is the same publisher that publishes all the Peanuts remasters and all the Donald Duck spinoffs, Darkwing, and various iterations of that. And so for them, this lighthearted, comic-y thing to publish this book out was like a big 180. And it was kind of surprising to see this come out of them.
So a little history of this book. I mean, with comic book buffs and eventually, I think, with historians, they'll look back on everything that Barry Windsor-Smith did. You always look at like an artist or a writer or, a painter or anyone like that. They can only produce so many things in their life. Actors, actresses, there's only so many things that sort of becomes their portfolio. And it's been quite some time since Barry Windsor-Smith has had something that was like
in the public eye.
His thing, where everyone was like, oh my gosh, this guy. So he kind of launched back into the mainstream for comic book lovers because he is a talented artist, a really talented artist, especially with pen and ink.
Exactly. And that's what
all this is.
That's what this, it's pen and ink style. It's all black and white. And it's highly detailed, one of the most highly detailed books we reviewed. I mean, yes, we reviewed Sin City, and we've reviewed our independent comic Twilight Custard, but then this is his own thing as well.
Yeah, like every page on here, if you really do break it down, it looks like it would take some even modern artists who are just used to kind of pumping things out on a computer or something that, or digitally, drawing, let alone really breaking this down into a thoughtful story and a thoughtful
cohesiveness.
Even just the page layouts, you look at them and you're like, wow, he's really moving this story in the direct, like it was purposeful the whole time.
Right. And, even though the only thing I would say is there's no like chapter breaks in this book, but even then, like you can consistently read this like 360 book in like a sitting or a couple days, and it's a continuous story.
Yeah,
but still it provides really good pacing.
Yeah, so let's do a little background on this. So the lore of it is in 1984. It started out as an Incredible Hulk story.
Yeah,
he wanted to write that for Marvel, to say, I want to write like the childhood of Bruce Banner. And he didn't really want to be light on it. He wanted to say, let's go into like his upbringing as a very harsh upbringing. Maybe look at was there sort of anger that was built up when he was a kid that kind of would reflect
Right.
into the
The
Hulk,
family
right?
dynamics.
Yeah.
What was his environment like that he grew up in?
Yeah, and at the time, Marvel wasn't ready to take one of their premier figures because I mean, in the '80s, Hulk was a whole.
Yeah,
I mean,
think
he had
Peter
his
David Hulk
show and
was
yeah,
out then.
yeah. Well, and like the show on TV and everything. I mean,
Sure. Oh yeah,
Lou
yeah, Lou
Ferrigno.
Ferrigno.
Yeah, it's like,
oh my gosh, yeah.
I mean, everyone knew Hulk, and it was really one of it at the time, one of their really strong money makers, but also
Yes.
like a really well recognized brand. And I don't think they wanted to bring that down.
No, especially like after reading this. No.
Yeah. So here is our little blurb about this being a very adult book.
Yes,
So
mature content for
Yes.
sure. It's not for the lighthearted or for younger readers.
I mean, even just reading through it without some of the really rough like abuse lines and things, there still has like Nazi Germany and like experiments on people and just the way people react. So
yeah, and there's no training wheels on this book. It is just
yeah,
all out.
Yeah. You know, and the title, you know, I know we're just hopping all around, but it's just things that are popping in. But when I first saw it, you know, the cover is a little misleading. So it has sort of this grotesque sort of Frankenstein looking face on it. So then you're
absolutely.
like, look at it entitled
Right.
Monsters, and you're like, oh, I get it. It's like a monster.
But then you have this like American flag poking out of his ear.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, okay.
And you don't really, I mean, without reading, I always look at like, what is the cover, right? So
Yeah.
without reading the back or the inside. So to me, it just looks like Barry Windsor-Smith is doing a story about like almost like Frankenstein's monster,
Right.
Or you know, something.
And
like
I could see that. But he really breaks down the very core definition of what could be considered what is a monster.
Yeah.
Or how do you build a monster? What's the environment? What's the every aspect of it? He breaks down in this book.
Yeah. And you start reading it, and about 50 pages in, you say, oh, I get it.
And it's real life like
the
aspects
people.
and situations.
Yeah. Like,
Basically, there are some superhero elements that he still puts in this book because that's still very dear to his heart.
mhm.
But he wants to put it in a very realistic scenario.
Yeah. And it was his first book released in 16 years.
Yeah.
So I even have a quote here. It says, Windsor-Smith describes the book as one that explores the life and times of two disparate American families, fatefully connected by an abandoned Nazi project in genetic engineering that has been covertly revived by the U.S. government. So it's like,
And it's like,
wow,
oh,
there's a lot to it.
yeah, yeah. And I guess in a little better analogy that I came up with was this is Captain America growing up, but it's the Hulk, and the Hulk is in the World War II.
Yeah. So that the book takes place. Yeah. So
Captain America's origin, but instead of Captain America, it's the Hulk, and it's a deadly twist on it.
and it's pushed into the 60s. So it's like the Vietnam.
Yeah, pre-Vietnam era.
So it's like if they were making a super soldier for the Vietnam era,
yeah,
and they're using World War II Nazi technology.
Yes.
And they didn't have it quite right. They didn't have all of the formulas and didn't have it totally figured out. So things go horribly wrong. So it's not like they made a super soldier.
Sure.
They made a super soldier, but it just mostly just ruined this kid.
Right. And you get to delving into the book and the story and the characters. This bases around the life and times of Bobby Bailey and how the government and the world around him turned him into a monster.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. You know, when you read comics, you always kind of think of what are the real world repercussions. And I know we've kind of touched on that a little bit in some of the past podcasts of just, you know, it's one thing to read a book or read a comic or, you know, work through a graphic novel and think this is a different world. But it's another thing to just put it like grounded really specifically into like American culture.
Yeah,
And that's
a
what
very
this,
Pacific,
yeah.
lively time period that it
Yeah,
was.
like this is hyper realistic for the time period and hyper realistic for um like a glimpse into this
Yeah,
family,
sure.
and it's like
And it's
not the
very
family
near
you want to
dear
be
and it's
in.
personal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
So I guess this story also jumps around in flashbacks um, and various different time periods. But the story starts off with you see Bobby just they're going out to like they hear his mother hears like, oh, well, the boys are, I have to go find them for dinner and find out that Bobby's
Find her husband
yeah,
and
find her
her
husband
son.
and son, and something is going like horribly wrong. And all of a sudden you find that the mother is like desperately hurt, and Bobby is like beat
Really
up,
hurt
really
too.
hurt.
Yeah. So and that's all you get to like, so it immediately opens with violence, domestic abuse, and
Yeah,
it's just right there. So the book, I mean, page one,
yeah,
so
it's just in your face, and this is like, here's the problem, and now we're gonna dial it back to how we got here.
yeah, sets the scene and then hits you with a flashback.
Very cinematic in that way.
Yeah, actually that's a good way to say it.
Yeah,
It puts the action right up front, like
right.
boom.
And then we kind of follow him and getting hired in at the recruitment office. And so they're kind of figuring out, he's just coming off the street and he's looking for to get hired by the army. And he doesn't have any like background information, identification,
It's kind
nothing
of a
really.
scrawny kid.
Scrawny
Like,
kid, he doesn't. Maybe he's kind of scraping by.
yeah.
Could be homeless, but we're not really too sure if he's been hopping around or anything. And Officer Powell is like, or not Powell, Officer McFarland. Uh, he's like, oh, I think you would be good fit for this project.
Yeah, we have
Yeah.
a special
We have a special project in
a
mind
special
for you.
team that we are
And
putting in.
all your problems will be taken care of by the army. You'll be, compensated well. Oh, okay.
And you do pick up as the reader, you pick up that the reason why he kind of fell into that was because he didn't want to say much about his childhood. He didn't want to say much of like who he is and where he came from. So then the army sort of took that as
An opportunity.
that he is a nobody.
Yes.
And an opportunity to say, okay, now we've got a total nobody. And they kind of shuttled him off to the secret project, like kind of building up on his naive idea of what it is to help the war effort.
If he would be taken out of society, this would be the least amount of repercussions.
Yeah, like would anyone care?
Would anyone care?
Yeah.
And so they take him off, and you just kind of follow. They find out, oh, take your sunglasses off, and he's missing an eye. And you're like, oh, that's not good.
Yeah. And they're like, how did this happen?
Well, he doesn't really want to let on. He's just like, oh, I think he made something up just to say, just to pass and keep it going. And the whole time, like Officer McFarland's like, oh, I might have made a mistake.
Yeah, like there's something that we didn't totally vet this person out. There might be some underlying emotional problems, and they didn't really want to have that in the program because you need to be of sound mind, and you need to be a strong character, things like that.
Sure.
Right away, actually, you start seeing really a lot of similarities to some of Barry Windsor-Smith's other projects. He definitely has an artistic style, but the great thing about this book, if you're familiar with his work, and even if you looked at some of his work from like 20 or 30 years ago, it was for like Marvel Comics and things. So some of it was just really simplistic.
Mm-hmm.
Like they had to just get that page done, like
right.
Pump it out, let's go color it, And this one, you can really tell that he still has his style, but it's like someone gave him a whole week to just work on it. It's like, you don't get that in the industry. Sometimes it's like, you got to get it done. Right. Like,
absolutely.
But yeah, no, it's,
and I guess,
nice.
So you were talking earlier, I think you mentioned it's like a crosshatch style or.
Yeah. So he's really famous for his pen and ink.
Yeah.
And that's mostly just legitimately old style dipping a pen in an inkwell, scratch, 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 dip it, scratch, 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 dip it, scratch, scratch, scratch. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if nowadays he used like a micron pen or something like that. That's just a finer tip.
Sure.
That there isn't like a dip and draw kind of
Right.
thing. But
I do like that all of his figures are very identifiable. From,
yeah, I mean,
especially in black and white, that's probably hard to do.
Yeah.
And the style, I mean, and to do it for as many, like 300 and some pages.
And you can see that, just even though his characters are simplistic, just the way that he draws like their mouth or their eyes or like how their, expressions are, he kind of pulls that in every single time. And then you immediately pick up. Because, I mean, some of the uniformed officers, they all look sort of the same, right?
Sure. He still uses all the like rules of lighting and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Just like when you're down in the basement or they're trying to like hide out from somewhere or there's like a desk lamp or something, he still goes and obeys all those rules.
Well, and a lot of texture. And I mean, even when I was first reading it, I was really actually pleased with how he uses his backgrounds. A lot of times artists don't really think much of the background when they're doing comics because the focus is on the character, right?
Sure.
And if you really look at a lot of the storyline, you're pretty much like right there. I mean, you're not like it's not being drawn from across the hallway or like, there's no big
again, that personal.
You're
personal
pretty much standing right next to these characters the whole time. And then it becomes really kind of like hard to handle sometimes because they really get intense and you're just literally right there.
Sure. I guess, did you see that on, what was it, on page 28, he draws, another couple characters are looking at all the comics in the basement and he draws like an issue of Batman and the Human Torch and like
Captain
the Boy
America,
Commandos and stuff like that, and Captain America, I think he gets drawn. So it was a little like love letters to all the like the golden age.
Yep, he got to kind of catch into that. And the other part of it is when you see his style, like sometimes he's doing a drawing and there's a lot of snow, like blowing snow.
Yeah,
that's just such a big visual from like Weapon X when he did Weapon X. There's always that blowing snow because it was in the Canadian wilderness.
So he still likes all those superheroic elements to it.
Yeah,
he just wanted to give it a serious tone.
He wanted to tell his story.
Yeah.
He's been around comics. So he's 70 years old now. He's been around.
He's still alive today. So
for 50 years.
Yeah.
So he's like, I got a story.
Sure. So back to like the story. So we go along and we follow a couple characters, and we're also introduced to Officer McFarlane's like family, and we find out that those guys, he introduces the elements of telepathy and what in that setting you could play on that.
Yeah. I don't know. Andrew and I we didn't know if that was just coming out of left field or like why was he introducing that, but I think he was just I think he was leading up to some of the more sadder moments.
Sure, and I think it's a very like a plot device or something to help move like.
To give that character
something to do and something to flesh out the backgrounds. We were talking in the pre-show that every character basically has their own story, and he goes into like a background and he fleshes out like where their origins are, how they kind of got to here.
Yeah. I mean,
how they played a role in Bobby's life and how they came to be.
Well, and when I was reading it, you really pick up on, sometimes we mention like playing the long game, which mostly just means to me, playing the long game in comics is like, if Marvel or DC said, "Hey, you're the new comic writer for this series," and you start laying all these groundworks, and then when you're reading it, you're like, how are you going to wrap this up in 5-ish, 10 issues?
Yeah.
Like, no, I know I'm going to be writing the character for 4 years. And it's like, what? That's
right.
So you same idea is, if you had a TV show, it's like, you want a TV show for years, but if they said you have one season, tell your story.
Yeah.
So like in this story, you get the idea that, it's really nice to see that. First of all, I thought the pacing was slow and meaningful, slow in a really good way, right?
But it wasn't slow as in like and like we mentioned, there's no like chapter breaks, so there's still like stopping points he's kind of like carved out but it still flows really well with each other.
It's almost like resting your brain moments.
Yes,
You
and
know,
kind of
it's like,
digesting it. Yeah,
when it gets really intense, he kind of stops and he brings you back to the past and tells some story
yeah,
from like another
time
viewpoint.
period. Yeah, another
So it's
viewpoint.
like,
Yeah,
oh, it's a good brain break. But the arc that some of these characters go through, like his mom. I mean, her arc
yeah,
from
Janet.
when you
Yeah,
first meet her to like the end. Oh my gosh, it's like her character is strong, like really
yeah,
developed. Like, he really thought about every angle he's going to push with her.
right. And she this is in like the World War II, and so when her husband Tom, she knew him as like a lighthearted working class, just average American. He was a translator for the army, and he was getting deployed over in Germany for the war. And she finds out that like he's not coming back at scheduled time with everyone else.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
she has to she's also raising their young son, and so she has to kind of put on a brave face and kind of help him grow up, without a real prominent father figure in his life.
Yeah. And you can't help but to sort of pull into some of that world history and just think, if you were if you were
Single parent.
yeah, if you had one son and your husband went away to fight in the war, you're a single parent.
Yep.
It's you and your son, and you see all these other husbands come back from the war, and then and yours
Yours
is not.
doesn't. So
Yeah.
it makes you like freak out,
Yeah.
kind of paranoid about
And-
what's going on.
And just building that suspense of just regular daily life. I felt like every page here, since there's so much black, there's so much,
Sure.
there's no color and there's no like happy blue skies, like it's
Oh
just
no.
constant, like
Yeah.
like a big blanket is sort of like on top of you while you're
Sure.
reading this.
And then there's also like all the conspiracy stuff she's surrounded with too, because the government doesn't want to tell her any reasons why.
Yeah.
Her husband's like still in overseas, and so they're like, well, she's like, can I write to him? What are you putting in the letter?
They're
They
like,
have to like really vet it so hard.
yeah, we're working on him. So they had to
Right.
like I don't know what that's called.
Deprogram
Deprogram him?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Deprogram him. Yeah. And he's never the same person though when he comes back.
Yeah.
Like in like a Vietnam setting, or like somebody comes back. Of course they're not going to be the same, but this was like Barry Windsor-Smith was like, all right, let's take that to an extreme.
Yeah. I wonder too, as he was writing this, he was probably, writing it, I think on a one level. And then I think he sat down and just kind of punched all of the pieces up.
Sure.
It felt like he took an idea and you were like, oh geez, I get that. I see what's happening here. And then he like added 3 more layers to it. Like,
Yeah. Oh, and this is happening. This is happening.
like-
this screwed up.
like, oh wow, okay. This is the tone of the book, I think, changes to the point where now it's a mature reader.
Yeah, absolutely. And once you figure out, Bobby kind of becomes this like, well, this you see him grow up as this like little boy without a dad or prominent figure, and then he's like an adult and he's like homeless, and you can't help feel for him, or you're like, what's going on with his life? How did he get here? And then he becomes this like Hulk of a
Yeah.
monster, but his body is so like too drastically evolved. Like unlike the Hulk, where the Hulk can articulate words at least and expressions and emotion, where he can't anymore.
Yeah.
And that's just sad to see that whole arc kind
Yeah.
of happen, and you can't
So-
help feel for him.
So I mean, that's true. He doesn't really have, at that point, he just becomes a memory bank for us, like
Yeah.
we sort of live the rest of the book in his flashbacks.
Yes.
And I think people who wanted him to just stand up and fight or something, it's like you just got caught up in his life as a kid, and like
Yeah.
his family as a and his mom, and
Right.
like
It's a great character study, believe
Yeah.
me. It's a great character story.
and I think the connection point with him being sort of a grotesque thing,
Yeah.
that connection, I think what it's showing the reader is he is grotesque looking on the outside, not to get so deep, but he's
Yeah.
grotesque looking on the outside. But look at these other people
Yeah.
who seem to have everything together, but they really don't. So then
Right.
you start thinking about the title of this book, Monsters. So you're like,
Who's the real monster?
who is the monster?
Right.
Visual monster are we looking at, or like these other people who have some serious issues?
Like the father.
Yeah,
Tom.
right.
Tom is probably considered a monster.
Yeah, they paint him like you know exactly where you want to place him in sort of the hierarchy of this book. You're like,
Yep.
oh gosh,
Oh.
that guy is something else.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah, he's a work or something. Yeah. And that's just like the environment. Are you a product of your environment? I think that's one of the other things that
Oh,
I
sure.
think this book wanted to answer that question. How does that monster happen? Is it because of your surroundings? It's because who you encounter? It's because of the situation you put in. It's very interesting to.
Well, so here's another important piece of it all. So Bobby went through the experiment and it turned out terrible.
Yeah.
And he outwardly changed his appearance to a grotesque thing.
Yes.
But inside, he, I think, is reflecting on his whole life at that point. Like,
Right.
oh, how did I even get here? And then you look at like how he got there, and then you think, well, what's going through his mind? Is he blaming anyone, or is he just saying like, this is my life story?
Yeah.
And
Yes,
so
it's like an autobiographical.
yeah, like he
Yeah.
wasn't bitter, and you could tell he was just sort of like, these are the cards I was dealt, and that's what I got.
Right. But yeah, it's definitely a very interesting book, and just to kind of grow with the supporting cast, seeing kind of some of the creative liberties like Barry Windsor-Smith uses from his super heroics of trying to deliver these like plot threads and stuff like that.
Yeah.
These supernatural elements he can sneak in, and some of the crazy like Germany Nazi things like he gets from like, or at least I felt like some of it was like from Hellboy or something he was bringing over.
Yeah, a little bit. It's almost like he took his whole career, from, and when you go on, let me just get back to that. His website is barrywindsor-smith.com.
Okay.
And when you look at the site, it just pretty much says these are the projects that Barry Windsor-Smith, worked on. And he worked on the X-Men and Conan the Barbarian, and he worked on Red Sonja for a while, and Opus, and Gore Blimey Press with The Devil's Lake, and even DC and Valiant and Image and Mail.
Yeah.
I mean, he's worked with everybody everywhere, right?
Mhm.
And I think the reason why he was always hired by a lot of these publishers is because, number one, he had a unique style. But number two, I think he really got like the characters he was drawing.
Sure.
Like he drew that Exo Mano War and
Yeah.
stuff, like he
Okay.
really put that together, and Bloodshot and stuff. That's probably one of his
some of the
more-
early Valiant stuff.
yeah, like super Valiant stuff. And I think, when people look at that, they think he is one of the artists where you can hand him a script and say, here's the scene, here's the layout, and he would just make it happen.
Right.
So then he took all of those experiences, everything on here. I mean,
Yeah.
he's even done some Daredevil and stuff too.
Sure.
And I think he just showed everyone. I mean, they're calling this book like his magnus opus.
Yeah.
Like this is
Yep.
this is like his
Right.
swan song. It's
Yeah.
like
This
his
one,
thing.
yeah.
And I think he's showing the whole comic book community, like, you don't have to stay in a niche, and you don't have to stay in conformity, and you don't have to use the digital,
Magnum opus.
digital artwork and stuff. You can tell a story based on you, and
Yeah.
and yeah,
What
it is
creative
fun.
ideas.
I mean, because he really is pulling all of those from 50 years of work. Really,
Right.
I mean,
that's not
great.
a lot of creators can do that.
No, I mean, that's great to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But yeah, the characters in here are super memorable, super well done. All the artwork. I mean, if you grab books like I do and just sort of flip through them, like flip. Yeah, I'll take this. This is cool. There isn't a single page. I mean, we've been flipping back and forth through this while we're
Sure. Even in,
recording.
in some of the pages where
Man.
he doesn't like fill it with like panels of art, he'll still from the mother's perspective, she was always like journaling, and he would take and just write some of her notes on
like
there,
actual cursive, and stuff.
Actual cursive, which was I think an interesting choice, but at the same time, like it gives it more personal touch to it, and there's still like it's still legible if you can read cursive.
Well, yeah, and it's like
and then that also gives like a perspective, like the mother's like mindset throughout this book that evolves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because she starts like midway, and then when she's like younger and she's like, oh, I miss my husband too. Oh, I'm kind of afraid of my husband.
Yeah. And then she's like, I've met a friend, and
you learn about her story.
She's like, I shouldn't write it in here,
Yeah. She's like afraid of like the government like smuggling.
Yeah. Like you really get the idea that she's honestly writing this. I mean, you really get tapped into these people, and I'm telling you, I would read this for 20 or 30 pages and then like put it down for a minute, like, whew, like you're really in it.
Absolutely. I think I powered through like the first 100 pages, and then I would take like a 50-page break here and there, just the different like timelines and the chapters. Yeah.
And it sets a pace. It keeps you in it, and like I said, even flipping through the pages, one is cursive with some spot illustrations. The next one is, all 4 panels. The next one has no panels. The next one has, all black with just text on it, and the next one is like all from the perspective of the police. And it's just like, man, it's just
it's really well thought out.
Mm-hmm. I can't even imagine. I really want to see some of the original pages he did on this, because that would be really something to see.
Yeah. I doubt I wonder how much editing and how much all like the behind the scenes stuff that he had to do. I'm glad that this wasn't a Marvel book, because then it would have been really reserved.
Yeah, they probably would have backed down quite a bit.
Yeah, you would have had to strip half the story really. And so I'm glad he was able to actually bring his vision to life and just let it go.
Yeah. Just an awesome book. So, and the nice thing is we try to look for stories that sort of break from the norm, you know, and kind of
an interesting read.
Yeah. Put another aspect on what exactly makes a comic and what exactly, is a serious grown-up comic. What is that? And what is the difference between Marvel and Fantagraphics and Image and Vertigo? And all, it's just, there's so many companies out there now that are taking the leap into really, really, I don't want to say grown up, but just really professional stories.
Right. And I would say if you like any like true crime stories or podcasts or things like that, I would definitely check this out. You definitely get to like grow up with all the characters and kind of figure out how they tick and things like that. And it's a tragedy. We can't scoot around that. It's a sad book. There's not a lot of happy moments in there. But there's definitely like really strong character moments that you're like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah. There's little wins.
There's small wins.
Oh, that's a dig. You got it.
Yep. Especially that.
But yeah, excellent all around.
Yeah, this is definitely one of the top reads of the year that people are saying.
Yeah, I think we're gonna call it. It's like a top 10 now, because I mean, it really hit the market strong. People are gonna remember this for a long time.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So we definitely highly recommend it, and hope you check it out. It's readily available. You can pick it up at most places online right now. It's a very more affordable book, and we
check out your local comic book stores too, because the cover price is $40.
It was $40, and you can usually get it for half off that,
something like that.
And it's a hardcover. It'll hold up really nice, and it looked great on the bookshelf.
There you go.
Just don't let the kids read it. All right. This is Bam Pow Comic Hour with your hosts,
Chris Ramos
and Andrew Gallagher, signing off.
See you later.